Welcome, everyone. It's a thrill for me to welcome you to a very special event tonight. Political advertisements is an incredible achievement, and it's a long-term project of Marshall Reese and Antoni Muntadas, and it's just an impressive work, and you're really in for a treat. So before we get started, or before Marshall comes up and introduces the actual film, I'd like to let you know a bit about them. Antoni Muntadas was born in Barcelona in 1942 and has lived in New York since 1971. His work addresses social, political, and communications issues, the relationship between public and private space within social frameworks, as well as channels of information and the ways they may be used to censor central information or promulgate ideas. He works on projects in different media such as photography, video, publications, internet, and multimedia installations. Since 1995, Muntadas has grouped together a set of works and projects titled On Translation, emphasizing issues of interpretation, transcription, and cultural translation. Their content, dimensions, and materials are variable and focus on the author's personal experience and artistic activity in numerous countries over 40 years. His most recent project, Asian Protocols, explores similarities, differences, and conflicts between Korea, Japan, and China. And now Marshall Reese is a Brooklyn-based artist working in various media, including video, information networks, custom hardware and software, editions, and temporary public art events. Since the mid-'80s, he has collaborated with Nora Ligorano as Ligorano Reese. Their work investigates the impact of technology on society and the rhetoric of politics and visual culture in the media. Articles about their work have been published in the New York Times, Art Forum, Art in America, the Huffington Post, and seen on television and other media. They have received awards and grants, including 3 New York Foundation for the Arts Fellowships, as well as National Endowment of the Arts Fellowship, 2 Jerome Foundation Fellowships, a Puffin Grant, and a number of artist residencies. They are represented by Catherine Clark Gallery and show addition work with Jim Kemper Fine Art. And I've known Marshall for quite a few decades, and Nora, and it's really a pleasure for me to introduce him. And when I moved to New York in 1993, Marshall made that landing much easier by helping me get a job on a TV show called Homicide: Life on the Street. So here we go. Please welcome Marshall Reese and Antoni Muntadas.
Thank you very much for coming out tonight on a Friday night in Pittsburgh on the eve of an important election. Muntadas and I have been working on political advertisements since 1984. I was very gratified to begin working on this project when Muntadas invited me to collaborate with him. Antoni, you want to say a few words about the project?
Yeah, well, first is, sorry I couldn't be with all of you. It's different to be distant than just sound present, but it was difficult for me to come for different reasons. And I think Zoom, in this case, is the alternative. Anyway, yeah, the project started, actually 83 is when I start to discover a book of a diamond spots. Then it was analyzing the different advertisements made from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and that book it was published in the 80s. And that encouraged and intrigued me to know more and to see the advertisement and to see his archive of Ed Diamond. And I think from that encounter come up the possibility to do a project that we share with Marshall Reese on seeing the proper advertisement, not necessarily to read, but to see it. And I think this is the intention of that project. And I think it has all different kind of aspects, like the evolution of advertisement, media, and politics. But I think it's maybe I go back to to Marshall and will be more explicit about this introduction.
Great. Thank you, Antoni. So, I mean, I'm not going to talk much longer because I want to start the film soon. But I do want to say that after the screening, Muntadas and I will be talking with Professor Kathy Newman about the project and about what you've seen, what we've seen. I want to thank you all for coming. And one way I feel I'm bringing coal to Newcastle, because I understand that you're inundated with this material, but what you haven't seen is how this material has changed since it began in 1952. And that will, I think, be very instructive when you understand the media, this media, in those terms. So Muntadas and I will let this show begin.
I'm Kathy Newman. I teach in the English department here. My first book is about the history of radio advertising, especially in the 30s and 40s. And my hypothesis was that one of the things that sort of gave birth to the consumer movement was anger about advertising, and especially advertising that interrupted the programming. So radio advertising was new in that way. And so this is why Susie asked me to lead the Q&A tonight with Marshall and Antoni about 60 years, 70 years of political advertising. So I guess my first question is, what are you seeing now in 2024 that maybe you didn't see when you first sort of put this compilation together in the 80s?
Well, I think that an overarching theme is a very emotionally driven message, and particularly provoking fear in voters to vote for specific candidates and parties. I mean, that's I think been a trend over decades now.
If I could give my opinion, I will say that I see the elections become more and more dirty. They become more dirty in a sense of the disqualification and using the emotion of fear make the elections that really are more difficult ever to see it. I think is people get tired lately about such a way of disqualify and in instant to have a certain kind of respect for the other. I think that is totally unrespectful.
Yeah, I think dirty. I'm thinking about the paintball with the Romney lookalike. I think one thing that really surprised me about this compilation was seeing the number of times that people ran for president and sort of
Right.
what their advertisements looked like kind of earlier in their careers, seeing some of those same images come back. I mean, and this is totally obvious, but I'm just struck by how it's always men until it wasn't. But the advertising didn't really seem to change. When Clinton was running for president, a lot of those ads looked so similar to the ads we had seen sort of all along.
You're talking about Hillary Clinton? Or,
Yeah. So what are some other patterns that, are kind of striking you in this election?
Well, I think that one of the things that Muntadas and I have discussed is rather the lack of, since America is such an important force in the world affairs and that we're on the edge of serious conflicts in Eastern Europe and the Middle East, that there's been hardly any mention at all of international affairs. I think another thing that there's a very narrow bandwidth of the type of issues that are always talked about. bread and butter economic issues seem to be the course, the main course for these.
Yeah, I think the number of times that we heard taxes, prices, inflation, deficit, and there was never really a discussion of what taxes do. That when we collect all of our money together, we're able to have things like roads and bridges and healthcare and education. It seems like in election time, nobody really wants to talk about the purpose of having a civil society.
I mean, to go back to Muntadas's comment about disqualifying candidates, I think that it's mostly about negative advertising to depict the other candidate. And when I've seen this anthology now a few times recently, one thing that stands out to me is the Dukakis convention speech, where he's talking about a type of community values, helping other people and an uplift that really is rarely talked about.
Yeah, the Willie Horton ad is so defining. It just seems like it obliterated him.
It did.
Yeah. I think we
could open it up.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, if you guys don't mind sharing a mic, I'll take the mic out.
Yeah, that's
Sure.
fine.
Can you tell me which one was the Horton ad again? That ruined him?
It's the one in 1988. It's a Willie Horton. It's about the weekend Dukakis on crime.
Oh, you kind of saw that happen again.
Yeah,
later.
well, exactly in this recent ad with Harris.
Okay. Who's brave enough to go first? Who's got the first question?
I don't normally watch TV, but a couple weeks ago I was visiting my parents, and they have TV going all the time. And one type of ad I noticed that happened this year that I didn't see in this compilation was in the last month or so of I don't know if this was happening all the time, but it seems like in the last month or so of this election, the Trump campaign and its affiliates have basically created a lot of ads that focus on being anti-trans. And and going after minorities, and especially very weak and very small minorities. And I'm just curious as to why you didn't include that part of it.
Well, I mean, I think thanks, Susie, for bringing that up. I mean, the anti-trans ad, we edited this compilation in mid-October, so the trans attack ads happened more recent than that, after we'd finished editing it. But also, I mean, Tim Scott alludes to it. I mean, it becomes like a platform for the Republican campaign when he says, like, and men, will play sports with men, and but yeah, I mean, I've found several ads lately that are specifically anti-trans, and actually I don't want to get too much into the history of it or the nuts and bolts of it, but Harris is being attacked for supporting trans operations and therapy in prisons, when that was actually something that was passed under Trump. So it was a Trump policy to help inmates make transitions, and not, but they're blaming Harris for it.
Would like to bring some issues then about that maybe it's not appear in the film, but is an important matter, is the economics on these campaigns. The amount of money they cost, and I think this year it was $20 billion. I think it's 1/3 more than the past. And I think it's going increasingly that, and I think it's in a way all to try to convince in a kind of seductive way to not in an informational way, because most of them didn't talking about what they got to do, but just in a way of seduction to try to get the vote. And I think something that this, I think I found in any other country in the world, I think this thing happened, this amount of money to expend that way.
Hello. So I'm assuming that for pretty much every candidate for every election, they ran multiple ads. So I was just curious what the sort of criteria were for including it in this edit. Thanks.
Well, I think I start that, and Marshall maybe would emphasize more. I think editing is an important strategy for finishing the work and to make the decisions. And edit as a montage, filmmaking, I think we know that the last word is with the edit, the last cut. And I think this is something that needs to come after a selection of many ads. I would like to use the word of critical subjectivity. I think it's impossible to deal with objectivity in these issues. I will say subjectivity is the way, but I would like to add the word, because I think you could be subjective, but you shouldn't lose the sense of criticism. That I think this is a take. I'm sure Marshall, you will provide other.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Muntadas and I are looking at these advertisements stylistically, thematically. Each election year follows a timeline and narrative of when candidates are running and when they drop out. For me, I'm really thinking about how the election year unfolds as a story in itself. And even though that this is a non-narrative, I mean, this is not a traditional or a commercial documentary. There's no central character, and there's no like specific narrative arc or tension around their life or what their pursuits are necessarily. But I think that this year I see like the turning point is well, first, of course, it begins with the Republican primaries, and then it goes to the day after the debate of Biden. And to me, that's kind of like a bittersweet moment, because his campaign tried to explain his performance following the debate as proof that he was in good health and intellectually alert. And as we get toward the end, I mean, in a certain way, the way that I look at it, and I think that we talked a little bit with Kathy about this yesterday, that the impact of Citizens United, which was a Supreme Court decision in, I think, 2010 or 11, has had a huge impact on our politics. And it's sort of privatizing the political process. And so that then with since beginning in 2012, almost each election block ends with a PAC ad, like Americans for Prosperity, Americans Crossroads, and the Lincoln Project. I think that that's a tacit understanding of how our political process has changed with the amount of money that's going into it.
Yeah, coming back to Citizens United and the question of $20 billion spent on advertising this year, I went to the Star Wars part of Disney World for the first time in 2020, right before COVID shut everything down. And it cost about $500 million to build each one. And I was thinking, was walking around thinking, okay, this is what $1 billion looks like, $500 million looks like. And thinking about the fact that we're screening this here in the School of Art, these are, the highest paid artists in America, the people making these ads. And just thinking about where our money is going. I teach a class every fall on banned books, and I asked the students, I said, what would you think about if we had like a more European system where campaigns were only allowed to last for 6 weeks, from the beginning of somebody announcing to the election? And they said, I don't know if we could get enough information about the candidates. And then somebody said, well, maybe we are getting too much information and too much of the wrong kind of information about the candidates. So I do think that in some ways, this isn't a partisan project. This is really a film that asks what kind of democracy do we have, or do we have a democracy when somebody's able to spend this much money on these advertisements.
Hi. It doesn't seem like the campaigns have learned much about persuasion over the years. And I noticed that the production values have changed, but the basic approach really hasn't changed very much. You were talking about there's a lot more money into it. I don't know what that would be, but advertising is much more sophisticated today. Is there a reason that you see why it stayed in this same mode of, I'm a great guy, vote for me?
Not really. I mean, I think that, for me, there's certain of the ads that become cherished or become, memes. The Morning in America's reused several times. And I was talking to someone recently who said, and I said, well, I felt that it was really a political consultant giving a nod to other political consultants that they could make, the same kind of ad for a different candidate. Because I would think that for most viewers or voters, they wouldn't necessarily remember the Reagan in America campaign in 1984 and see it reused in Marco Rubio or in the Lincoln Project about COVID. So I think that there's a certain, there definitely is a class of consultants or workers that are trained in this type of persuasion. And I think the sameness in messaging, even though the technology changes and gets more advanced, stays the same. And also I think the strategies for communicating, defining the opposition or the other candidates are the same.
In a way, I think the whole work become a series of ads that conform history. I think it's the history of all these only 70 years. Of course, from the view of media and politics, but it's clear that it has a value in terms to see how the country is evolved through series of films and advertisement that in a way is connected at the same way that products are produced like that. I think in a certain moment we're thinking that it will be interesting that in Washington, the gallery of presidents, they substitute the paintings for the advertisements in each one. I think it will tell a lot of history that is not saying the paintings.
Yeah, and I think that, along those lines that we talked among ourselves, that, really these are, there are a couple things. It's a history, but it's really not a history because these are the way that the candidates want to present themselves, and the issues could not always historical and could be from their telling more fictional. but also that they commission these teams of people to make portraits of themselves. And so that in that way, it's similar to the royal paintings that we're familiar with from Velázquez and other notable painters of royalty and important officials. But to respond to what Kathy said earlier, I think that in terms of a democracy, when you have a philosophy that's based on marketing techniques, and you apply marketing techniques to convincing, to a representative government, you will impoverish the governmental system. It'll become more like a marketing and a consumer. And I think in the United States, you hear the confusion of the word citizen with that of a consumer. And it's this obfuscation of what a citizen is or what civics are and the role of the market in defining it that is the crux of where we are at this moment.
I just wanted to just get in a quick comment. Coming back to the question about the anti-trans ads, I follow a journalist I highly recommend. Her Substack is called Erin in the Morning, and she's been tracking these ads, and one of her arguments is that Trump in this final week is losing voters who care about the economy because of these ads, that there's a saturation and an exhaustion and a frustration with these ads because they don't actually focus on what people care about. So just thinking about, do ads work? When do they work? I mean, there's a lot of, in some ways we don't really know the answer to those questions, but I do recommend checking out Erin's Substack if these are questions that are intriguing to you. So I see Wendy, and then there are two others after Wendy.
Yeah, you guys want to take it and pass it out?
Hi. My question actually has to do with the, my impression is that most of these are ads that are played on television, but I see a lot of ads, for example, on Instagram, and I'm wondering, are you, was it a decision to sort of exclude social media advertising from this, or do you see yourselves in future editions of this film including that kind of advertising? It feels like it's of a different length, it's of a different kind of vibe. I know, Kamala's Instagram account is kind of famous right now for being quite cheeky and aimed at, a different generation of voters. So I'm just curious, in an age where most of us maybe don't get our political advertising from television, how you might see this project evolving.
Well, we're mostly concentrating on broadcast advertising. A lot of these ads are on YouTube, and they do get distributed digitally. And we're also, our durational soft spot is 30 seconds to a minute. As this political advertising moves over to other platforms, that short duration is no longer the case. There are, television, or there are like these spots that are 2 minutes, 5 minutes. And when you're presenting 70 years of television advertising, we gravitate toward the shorter durations.
Thanks.
I think the fact that it's being showing the ads chronologically, it has the intention to be aware of this evolution. If we switch to mediums like Instagram or other social media, I think it will be another project. I think it's probably something to considering, but I think when you work in a project, it's very important to keep the parameters of the project, because if not, it starts to be very diffuse. I think in this case, how the 30 seconds or 60 seconds ads keep through the years, and I think it make possibilities to analyzing things in a comparative way that I think if we add other social media, it will be more, I think, maybe complex, but I think more difficult to understand the process.
Thank you. Kathy referred to the producers of these ads as artists, and I'm wondering if in your compilation and research you have a reference guide to who made the ads themselves, or do they just live in anonymity?
No. There's certain producers and that are specific and they're recognized for their contribution to the art form, we could. There are a few that stand out. I mean, I think there's the ones that stand out are obviously made by people that are, very good at what they do, and then the ones that are more generic or kind of are forgotten are by probably people who do media. No, I don't want to offend anybody here. Students of media communications that go out of colleges to become political consultants, and it's kind of like a certain sameness. I mean, like for example, I think that in the late '80s and early '90s, there's a similarity with the music, with a certain type of soundtracks of voiceovers, and I think that the spots that don't do that are very stand out. But there's not. I mean, so much has to be produced. There's not a lot of. I don't think much room for creativity in terms of the pressure of getting them produced.
Actually, my question is not about politics. I observed a very obvious change in the style of the Actually, I observed an obvious change in the styles of the political advertisement over the past decades. I want to know whether the change in the style of the advertisement is a reflection of the evolution of American pop culture. If so, how they influence each other?
I think that to some degrees that's true, but I also think that it's a reflection of how the technology for making film has changed. The use of the speed of editing, the quickness of the editing, the graphics, the layering of the soundtracks. I think that's more of a reflection of media savvy and having the tools to do it.
The Trump ad that featured a lot of the footage from the 2020 George Floyd protests, I noticed it had the same pacing as a lot of trailers, movie trailers, which has that kind of like bass drum beat, where each cut comes on a drum beat. So I do think they probably do kind of call and response to each other to some extent. I wanted to maybe just close us with one thought about the history of advertising. There's somebody that, Michael Schudson, advertising scholar, who's argued that, let me get this point and then we'll give Muntadas the last word. But Michael Schudson argues that American advertising could be seen in the same way we think of Soviet realism as sort of promoting the Soviet Union, the 30s, 40s, and 50s. He argues that our advertising system is capitalist realism. And he said, advertising is how capitalism says I love you to itself. So these ads sort of make me think about that argument. But we'll give you the last word.
I would like to add something of that. I think in order to compare American advertising and Russian advertising, I will refer the kitchen conversation. The kitchen conversation, it was the conversation between Khrushchev and Nixon at the Fair of Moscow. And it was very interesting because the American pavilion, it was a pavilion made by the Ames, the designers, with the first time it was showing an installation of videotapes with explaining how the American dream or the American life it was, like in the context of Moscow, that it was really a very propagandistic situation. But Khrushchev, it was referring to the Soyuz and the space conquest, the fact that it was really fighting in another space, in the not only the moon, but also the conquest of the space. I think that conversation, I think is very interesting, and I really recommend, because it's probably you find in YouTube. It was, I think I was talking about the years 60s. Yeah, I think it's interesting.
Okay.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming. Thank our filmmakers and our hosts. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you all so much.